President McGraw. Thank you, faculty, parents, grandparents, and I especially want to thank the class of 2011 and congratulate you. This is truly an honor to come back to Binghamton. It gave me chills just to walk back into this campus. I have so many memories here in this event center and around this campus. But this is no ordinary commencement. This is a winter commencement. And I think a winter commencement brings together a group of students that's quite different than a spring commencement. And I know this from personal experience because it took me 4.5 years to graduate from law school. And so I think there are two distinct mixtures of people here. First, the overachievers who wanted to finish early, and I commend you for that. And most importantly, most near and dear to my heart are the procrastinators in the room. And I want you to know that I feel your pain, okay? And you shouldn't be ashamed of that. Sometimes it takes some of us a little bit longer than others. So don't let your parents give you a hard time about that. But I'm here to talk about something more serious. About 9 years ago, not far from here, maybe about 100 yards, I had a life-changing experience. And it was a late February night in 2002, and I was studying in the science library, which I believe is still here, when my mind began to wander to one of those dark places that your mind wanders to when you're hanging out by yourself in a really creepy place like the science library. And for some reason, I became fixated on my mother's smoking habit. And I was by myself, just staring out the window, thinking about all of the different terrible things that could happen from this habit. And my biggest fear in life was, and still is, that my mother would never make it to see my brother, my sister, and I fulfill her dreams for us. And so, as I was starting to really come into my groove here in Binghamton, I started to really worry about what was going to happen with this smoking habit. And I don't know why it happened at that time, and I certainly don't know why it happened in this place, but it did. And, you know, she's been just a special person to me. She's put up with some incredible selfishness and foolishness from me, my brother, and sister. And she worked 2 jobs to put us through school and to raise us. And so it's just an incredibly important priority for me. And for what seemed like hours, I stared out that window. It was one of those floor-to-ceiling windows in the science library. And I was just thinking about smoking's health impacts, how horrible lung cancer can be, how my own actions might have contributed to the habit, and how ineffective I'd been up until that moment to get her to stop. But over the course of a few hours, my mind became extremely clear. Clearer than it ever had been before, and clearer than it's ever been since. I realized that this was the most important challenge in my life, and that I had to change my reality. And sincere half measures were not going to get the job done. I decided that the only acceptable course was to go to Staten Island and get her to quit. So the next morning, I skipped class, don't tell anybody, and hopped in my car and drove 3 hours, same drive that many of you are going to take right after this, and waited for my mom to get home. And I sat down at the kitchen table and told her that I was not leaving that table until she quit smoking. And what seemed like hours and hours and hours went by, where I was arguing with my mother, who likes to argue, and she just didn't take easily to, as you can imagine, her son giving her life advice. But through time and argument and grit, she relented and quit smoking, and she's never smoked a cigarette since. And I start with this story not because I want you to think I'm a hero. Quite the contrary, I've actually shaved more years off of my mother's life than any smoking habit ever could. And she'll be the first to tell you about that. And I haven't been a great son always. But the point of this story is that at that kitchen table, I learned an important lesson. That in life, we don't have time for half measures. Compromise can be dangerous. The personal, professional, political, environmental, and moral content of your world must be changed through a revolutionary zeal. An amount of energy and time and passion that dwarfs anything that you've done until now. And many people will tell you that there is a correct way to do things. People will tell you to calm down. They'll tell you to be realistic. They'll tell you to be less intense. They'll tell you to relax. You must ignore these people. And your ability to ignore those people and their unwritten rules will make the difference between a life of half measures and a life of revolution. Now let me pause to acknowledge an important fact here. I have not lived much longer than the graduates sitting here, and actually some of you graduate students I'm sure have lived longer than I have. Only 6 years ago, I was here in the field house sitting where you sit, and I can't even remember who spoke to us, which is scary for me. But because only a few years separate my experience from yours, I believe I have an obligation here to speak to you from the place of somebody who has lived through just a small slice of the power and promise of the next few years of your life. And after all, we're in the same generation, most of us. And revolutionary is not an adjective most people use to describe our generation. Here is one example of what people say about us, our generation. And this is a quote. "The ignorance is hard to believe. It isn't enough to say that these young people are uninterested in world realities. They are actively cut off from them. They are encased in more immediate realities that shut off conditions beyond. Friends, work, clothes, cars, pop music, sitcoms, and Facebook." End quote. That's an excerpt from a best-selling book called The Dumbest Generation: How the Digital Age Stupefies Young Americans. But there's a different story to tell about this generation, the generation that you are now graduating into. Let's start with the fact that we're inheriting a broken world, and that if there's any hope for humanity, we have to fix it in our generation. And for that you can insert a host of challenges: falling educational performance and a growing achievement gap, deforestation, climate change, income inequality, wage stagnation, national and personal debt, immigration, crumbling infrastructure, and discredited institutions. These are all issues and categories of issues that we just have not solved to date. And so putting to the side the incredible arrogance of somebody else in a different generation telling us how we can't solve these problems, first blood was drawn before any of us even enter this fight. And this fight cannot tolerate half measures. We need more revolutions. And thankfully, many revolutions are underway already, and the so-called dumbest generation is making history well before anybody thought possible. At the beginning of this year, young people rocked the Arab world. They toppled dictators in Tunisia, Libya, and in Egypt. Far from being distracted from world realities because of tools like Facebook and pop music, the new revolutionaries are using these tools to change the world. The famous Egyptian activist, and I'm going to destroy this name, so I apologize, Wael Ghonim, credited Facebook with playing a major part in the January 25th protest. He said, and this is his quote, "I want to meet Mark Zuckerberg, and I want to meet him one day and thank him. I'm talking on behalf of Egypt. This revolution started online. This revolution started on Facebook. This revolution started in June 2010 when hundreds of thousands of Egyptians started collaborating content. We would post a video on Facebook that would be shared by 60,000 people on their walls within a few hours." End quote. For starting this anti-Mubarak campaign, he earned himself a seat in prison under one of the most notorious torture regimes in the world. He understands the difference between half measures and true revolution, and many of his friends and colleagues lost their lives because of it. And so you should be proud of the generation that you are entering right now. Our generation knows where Iraq is on a map because we helped end that war. We know a lot about the president because we elected him. We know Middle Eastern politics because our generation changed Middle Eastern regimes. And so, since 2007, I have had the privilege to be part of a movement to remake American politics. I'm now part of a movement to remake American schools. And I hope that movement's a little bit more successful than the first. But both movements are dominated by young folks like you. And every single day at my current job at Nashville Prep, I'm reminded of the urgency of this rebellious struggle. Our average fifth grader at Nashville Prep comes in 2 grade levels behind in core subjects. For every 10 students who enter kindergarten in the neighborhood that we serve, only one of them will go on to graduate from a 4-year college if we don't do anything. So we can't tolerate half measures. We have to disrupt the accepted way of doing things. And our staff has brought a true revolution to our tiny pocket of North Nashville. Our students are on track right now to exceed the performance of the city and state this year in all core subjects. And within the next 2 years, we're on pace to completely erase the gap between our academic performance and the fanciest schools in the highest performing county in Tennessee. Every single one of our students will graduate from a 4-year college. And I just can't tell you how many people told me when I started off on that journey that I was foolish to think I can come in with a group of young folks and have no education background and change things for the better. I can't tell you how many people told me that jumping on the campaign of a skinny man with a funny name in 2007 was going to be a good professional experience. Most people thought I was crazy. My own family tried to talk me out of it. So revolutions are hard, and they certainly could be lonely. And since June of this year, our staff has been working 7 days a week, foregoing family vacations, breaking up with boyfriends and girlfriends, sleeping 3 or 4 hours a night, being cursed at, yelled at, underpaid. And so our Nashville revolution requires super colossal, back-breaking work, long hours, emotional turbulence, and a willingness to sacrifice some of the conveniences of a half-measure existence. And just during the campaign, I almost literally lost my soul on that campaign. Passed up opportunity after opportunity to tell the girl that I loved how I felt. And I passed up my last chance during the convention in Denver when instead of walking the 2 blocks that were required for me to tell her how I felt, I passed out and fell asleep. So for other revolutions and revolutionaries, the consequences are much more extreme, and so I shouldn't be whining. Ghonim and his friends and colleagues have lost, some of them have lost their lives. But life is only worth living if it's revolutionary. As one Egyptian activist said back in February, revolution is like a love story. When you're in love, you become a much better person. And when you are in a revolution, you become a much better person. So I call on everyone here to fall in love. Be a little swashbuckling. Do not settle for a half-measure existence. Life is too short, and the world needs you. Thank you.